Welcome to Not Your Ordinary Parts, a podcast where we talk about hard things associated with the human experience with the goal of increasing awareness, growth, and healing. You may hear information from professionally licensed therapists, life coaches, healers, doctors, etc. This information is not medical advice or therapy and is not meant to replace actual therapy or instructions given by a doctor or personal therapist. I'm your host, Jalon Johnson. My guest today is Dr. Lindsay C. Gibson. Dr. Gibson is an author, a clinical psychologist, and a psychotherapist who has worked in both public service and private practice for over 30 years. Dr. Gibson's books have sold over 1 million copies and have been translated into 35 languages, including the Amazon #1 bestseller, Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. In the past, Dr. Gibson has served as an adjunct assistant professor teaching doctoral clinical psychology students clinical theory and psychotherapy techniques. Dr. Gibson specializes in therapy and coaching with adults to attain new levels of personal growth, emotional intimacy with others, and confidence in dealing with emotionally immature family members. It is Dr. Gibson's goal to help her clients learn how to create positive new relationships that will allow them to build a better life. So, Dr. Gibson, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being my guest.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Jalon. Thank you so much for having me.
I gave a brief introduction, but so that the audience can get to know you better, would you mind giving us a little bit of background about yourself and how you got to who and where you are today?
Sure. Yeah. Well, as you said, I've been a psychologist and psychotherapist for a long time, over 30 years. And I have both a master's degree and a doctorate in clinical psychology. Um, I have been interested in depth psychology my entire career. It's never been particularly appealing to me to do only cognitive work or only behavioral work or the kind of I guess you could call it more pragmatic kinds of therapies. I'm always diving into let's get to the most elemental personal deep part of you and
Mm.
see what we can find out and see what we can release to become more of who and what you're supposed to be. That was the title of my first book, was Who You're Meant to Be. And that's a kind of an underlying mission with all my work, whether it's writing books or working with clients, is that there is a kind of a seed inside us. One person, James Hillman, a Jungian uh, psychotherapist, called it the acorn. And the
Mm.
acorn has everything in there that we're meant to be and that we will become if we're given the right conditions. And a lot of what I see psychotherapy being is helping the person learn how to create those conditions so that you can grow into what your potential was from the very beginning. So to me, that's been sort of the exciting thing about being a therapist or writing these books, is to help people feel that little jolt of recognition, like, oh yeah, that's so true, that's me, that's, I knew that but I didn't know that. So so that's been my personal mission. And when I was doing psychotherapy, oh, I guess it's probably been, well, easily 20 years ago, I began to notice that most of the people that were coming in to see me were coming in because they were having difficulties with difficult people. So it became this really interesting sort of thing I was noticing, Jalon, where it was like sort of like, well, all the people that had the problems and were causing the problems weren't coming in for therapy, but the people who were suffering from their actions were coming for therapy. So I felt like I was, in a way, kind of helping the wrong people, because the people I was seeing had a lot of emotional maturity. They were very interesting people that had a lot of substance. and they were just being driven out of their minds by people who were very insensitive and very difficult to get along with. So for me, it became a very interesting sort of problem to think about. Like, why are the people who are the most emotionally mature coming for psychotherapy, while the people who need the growth and the maturity the most won't have anything to do with it? And
Mhm.
that became just a fascinating pursuit for me. And, from that, all the study about the phenomenon came.
Wow. That's 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 kind of deep when you think about it, because the people who are suffering from the people who need therapy were coming to see you, but it's kind of backwards.
Yeah, exactly. That's the way it felt to me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you so much. Um, so you've been a therapist for over 30 years, and you have, tons of accolades. Um, did you ever think that you would be associated, or that your name would be associated with life-changing healing, and recovery, when you were younger?
Mm, that that is a really interesting question, because I would say that I've always had a sense of destiny. Now, that doesn't mean that I knew what was going to happen or what I was going to do. But I really, and I think that this sense of destiny is something that we all have, if we have the chance and if we have the support to feel it within ourselves. I think it's there in everybody. And I think I was fortunate that, um, I could sort of express that, and that wasn't killed off in me. I mean, I think my parents thought it was cute, that I would run around saying, "I want to be famous. I want to be famous." It's probably I wanted people to pay more attention to me is probably the problem, but but I did have a sense of destiny, like, oh, just let me get in the right place, and let me do what I enjoy doing. And I think there's going to be really good stuff that comes from that. So I had that kind of, um, a basic confidence about my potential. But the part that wasn't so certain was, could I get there? Could I get the chance, to do this thing that I felt I had to do, even though I didn't know exactly what it was at the time. But I've been very gratified that this has reached so many people. That's been the most wonderful part of this, because the feedback that I get from readers is, so phenomenal, that these ideas touch something in them that really helped them, that really shifted their paradigm of who they were and what had happened to them. So that, and for that to happen on such a large scale, was nothing that I could have imagined. I had no idea it was going to be like that. But I did have the sense that if I could get in the right place, find the right people, and I think a lot of us feel this way, I could become all that I was meant to. So, yes, I did I did have some sense of that, but no idea that it was going to be, really at this scale.
Mm. I remember, when I first saw your book, and just the title alone was so intriguing. And then when I had an opportunity to read it, like I had mentioned to you, it took me 6 months, and it's not a long read, but it was so impactful, and for me, life changing, because it was like hearing and learning about all the things that I knew were there, but didn't have language for, so to speak. And the way you so eloquently just told the story of, I think, so many people's lives. Like you said, it's become something on a scale that I don't think you could have ever imagined, because 35 languages and over 1 million copies, that is phenomenal.
Yeah, no, I I just love it. that happened. And I love it that I get the opportunity to keep supporting that for people. Yeah.
Mm.
It's interesting. You mentioned the title, John, and the original title was Raised by Wolves. That was the working title. And and my editor and I love that title. But one of the consultants that they bring in at certain phases in the book creation process said, no, nobody knows really what that is. And that could be a book about anything.
Right.
So you have to have it describe exactly what you're writing about. So it's like, okay, what's that? So then we came up with this title, and it's been interesting to me because so many people have been hooked by the title. When
Mhm.
I thought, oh, that sounds very, matter of fact, informative. It doesn't have the pizzazz of Raised by Wolves, but apparently a lot of people, when they saw that phrase, emotionally immature parents, it rang some bell, because people have told me that they picked it up for the title. So
Mhm.
the consultant was right.
The concept of emotional immaturity is intriguing, and like you said, I don't think a lot of people ever consider that someone's ability to comprehend or regulate emotionally could be measured in terms of maturity. But it makes so much sense, and I think you captured it just perfectly. But for those who may not know your work, can you explain and define what it means to be emotionally immature?
Sure. First of all, emotional maturity is like a line of development. Like our intelligence develops, our social skills develop. We have different abilities as we grow up that develop on their own line of development. And emotional maturity has its own path. So, what sometimes people find hard to understand is they say, well, my father couldn't be emotionally immature because he owns his own business and he's very well known in the community and he's very successful. Or, my mother is like the head of the PTA. She's very popular. She has loads of friends, very well thought of. Or my dad's the minister. I mean, whatever it might be. And so they say, well, given that social role, they couldn't possibly be emotionally immature. But yes, they could, because those are different skills. Those are different lines of development. So you can be very socially adept. You could be very successful, very highly intelligent. And yet, in the realm of emotions and relationships and managing your emotions, managing your ability to be close to other people, you could quite literally be like a little 4-year-old on the inside. Okay. And it wouldn't show up necessarily until you got stressed or until you were in an emotionally intimate relationship. And then it starts to manifest in a way that people notice, because the person has a lot of trouble in those areas. So just keep in mind that you can be mature in other areas, but immature emotionally. And if I had to pick a couple of hallmark characteristics for emotional immaturity, I would say that egocentrism, self-centeredness is a number one. All roads lead to them. They are the most important person in any relationship. Yeah, like please don't forget that ever, because
Mhm.
that's the way it is. And it's so interesting in therapy when people begin to first question that, because their whole life they have just accepted that, mom or dad or whoever uh, is the most important person in this relationship. I don't have the kind of importance that they do. I don't have a say like they do. And it's such a light bulb moment when they just even consider that both people in the relationship could be equal human beings. That's a very radical concept when you've been raised or kind of brainwashed that emotionally immature person is the most important person. So they can be very egocentric. They can, they usually show poor empathy. If things are going well for them, everything's lining up, yeah, sure, they can show empathy. It's not that they're all antisocial personality disorders. They can show it, they can feel it, but the problem is that even a little bit of stress or frustration or disappointment kind of turns them into a little kid again. And you see this very young behavior that comes out where they can't think of anybody else. They don't put themselves in their shoes. They don't think about how what they say is going to affect someone. They just don't do the empathy thing. They also have a low stress tolerance. They tend not to do great with stress. And they have this thing called affective realism, which is a term from psychologist Lisa Barrett, which means that they interpret reality through their emotions. So let's say that you didn't do something or didn't want to do something that I wanted to do, and I felt disappointed. Okay. If I was an emotionally immature person, I might be convinced that you didn't like me, that you hated me, that you didn't respect me because you didn't want to do this thing. Um, so their emotion colors their whole take on reality. Just like a 4-year-old, just like a 3-year-old. Like what I feel is what's really happening. And they don't have that ability to stand back and be objective. So with their approach to reality, they can deny, dismiss, or distort what's going on to make sure that they still feel okay about themselves and that they still feel like they're in control. Because typically they have to be right. They just have to be right. So those characteristics create problems in relationships, as you can imagine, living with someone who is like that. But they have very poor self-reflection. They're really not interested in wondering about why they did something. They're certainly not interested in how they could change themselves for the better. But they've got all kinds of ideas about how you could change for the better because they want you to be kind of like in an image that they create, because then everybody would be happy, because they're so egocentric and so global that that's the way it looks to them. So the opportunity for them to change, as long as they are not doing any self-reflection, is very low. People always ask, well, can they change? How can I get them to change? How can I get him to change? How can I get her to change? And I just ask them, do they show any signs of wanting to change? And if they don't, then that's a very basic, deep problem, because you can't change yourself if you can't get a little bit of perspective on yourself. And sometimes it's like an ultimatum, or could even be a court order that finally gets an emotionally immature person to come to therapy. And sometimes that works, but a lot of times it doesn't, because they tend to view life as everything is somebody else's fault. I'm okay. I was doing fine. And then you did something that messed it up. That's kind of their credo. So those are some of the things that you would look for and experience if you were with a person like that.
Thank you for that. I think unpacking and providing clarity and answers to such a broad and complex subject had to be a huge undertaking for you, Dr. Gibson. Um, was there any personal motivation involved in your work to help others understand and heal from the effects of emotionally immature individuals?
Yeah, the personal motivation for me was, I would call it a sense of unfairness. Um, that the people I saw who were struggling with these kinds of relationships, I felt that they were sincere. They were trying to change themselves. They were self-reflective. They were looking at reality and wondering if they had a part that they were playing in this. And I felt like they were, really basically um, sincere, um, yeah, genuine people who were caught up in these relationships that were causing them a lot of pain and frustration. And yet, what they were describing in the uh, people that they were in the relationships with was, again, that they weren't interested in listening, much less changing. And so there was a feeling that I always had, like, this is so backwards. This is so
Mhm.
wrong. that
Mm.
that this person who has all of these really I mean, as I see it, very important abilities, psychological maturity, that they are feeling bad about themselves because they're not doing enough of what the emotionally immature person wants them to do. And so there was a little sense of injustice or unfairness. And I wanted very much to help those people understand what was happening so that they could stop blaming themselves and feeling bad about never doing enough, never being enough to satisfy this person. Because I'm sitting there looking at this person as a psychologist and just checking off all their great qualities and their signs of maturity, and yet they were with a person who was making them feel very inadequate and very bad about themselves. So, internally, I sort of felt like we got to do something about this because um, this is not good. That these quality of people are feeling bad about themselves because of the psychological immaturity in these other people. So I would say that's where the sort of the emotional um, inspiration came from with this.
Mm. Well, I'm glad you did.
Yeah.
I'm really glad you did. Um, Dealing with emotionally immature individuals can cause someone to feel emotional lonely. Um, so, what I wanted to ask you is, what is emotional loneliness, and how might it present?
Yeah. When I was doing the book on adult children of emotionally immature parents, I was struggling with how to begin the book. Like, because
Mm.
it's important where you break into a subject, so that you carry your reader along with you. And that was a hard thing to figure out as I was doing that book. But then one day it came to me that that was the cornerstone of the experience of being brought up by people like this, is that you end up feeling lonely inside, feeling like you don't have a secure connection with that parent. And you feel it. You feel this loneliness. Now, I call it emotional loneliness because it's in the heart. It's in your emotional centers that you feel the loneliness. There's nobody in there with you. Okay, is the feeling. But you may be surrounded by people all the time. You may be part of a large family,
Mm.
you know? You may do very well socially. You, you may have plenty of friends. But people who have been through this kind of early experience in their lives, they will describe that feeling like, I always felt like I was alone or I didn't feel like I had anybody. always seemed like I was on my own. One man described it as, I felt like I was walking down a long road, and there was nothing on either side.
Wow.
Yeah. And that feeling is a very healthy reaction to not being able to get enough of that deep emotional connection and sense of being understood by your caretaker, could be your mother, could be your grandmother. Could be your older sister. It doesn't matter who the attachment person is. Okay. Could be your father. It doesn't matter. But it's that feeling that somebody sees me. Someone is looking out for me and notices how I feel and basically treats me like I have an inner world, treats me like they can see what's going on inside me. And that creates this sense of connection and security. And we are made for that. All the studies that they've done on attachment, let alone people, let's just talk about mammals for a moment.
Hmm.
That mammal attachment is a real brain thing. It's, right brain of the parent to right brain of the baby. Whether you're a person or a cat. There is a brain connection that goes on in mammals that helps soothe and regulate the emotions and the state of calm or agitation in the baby, because the caretaker is attuned to that baby's inner state. And that goes all through our lives. We always crave someone to be attuned to what's going on inside of us. And when there is not someone like that, or if the person does it in a very hit or miss kind of way, where maybe you get a little bit of that sometimes, when everything's going right, but then they kind of disappear, or they're too busy, or they blow it off, or they give you some superficial answer. And then again, you feel like you're emotionally alone again. But it's I just can't stress enough that it is a true physical need that we have. When we talk about it, it sounds, you know, like um, like philosophical or spiritual or ethereal or something, but it's not. It is organic, and we feel it when we don't get it. There have been, I don't know if anybody remembers this old movie. It was with Sean Penn. It was about a father who was fighting for custody of his child. And the father had a low IQ. And they were fighting to take the child away from him and give her the advantages of, parents who were um, normally intelligent. And the heartbreaking, storyline is that she was getting what she absolutely foundationally needed from that man because he loved her and he was attuned to her. And people were saying, oh, because he's not smart in the conventional way and wouldn't be a success in the world in the conventional way, he has nothing to offer her, because
Oh.
what's important is how much money he brings home and how smart he is and whatever. So, emotional maturity can happen in people who, can seem very ordinary. It's not a rare thing yet. So it's important that we understand that you don't have to have all these other markers of success to be an emotionally mature person. The proof of it is in your ability to feel for other people your ability to have a strong sense of self within yourself, to kind of know yourself, and to be a real human being, to be a genuine, authentic person.
I think it's almost become cultural to be disconnected from your emotions. And, you said it's an organic thing, just on a level that we as mammals need. Um, so for us to not have that, and then for that to become normal, I think is creating, like I said, a culture of people who have no emotional intelligence and then are defensive when they are told that they should. And then that just creates a whole nother world of problems.
Absolutely. I mean, that's why I said yet, because unfortunately, the kind of culture that is being supported and promoted, and a lot of it has to do with business interests and um, advertising and all that. But what's being promoted is a kind of uh, success by metrics. Like how much money do you make? What kind of house do you live in? It has this quality that somehow how many followers do you have? It's like,
Mm.
how many readers do you have? It's like you're being measured. And it's all about your bar graph, like are the numbers going up on you? And that kind of cultural emphasis is very left-brained. It relates to the part of the brain that's very logical, very rational, but doesn't understand about feelings or meaning or the worth of an individual, the inside world. It has no use for that at all, and it's very defensive. And it can also become very blaming of anybody or anything that's different from what it is, because it sort of is like looking in a mirror all the time, and it wants to see that you're just like it. And this is a very dehumanizing kind of road that we're on. I mean, it's industrial, it's technological, it's metrical. And I'm hoping that, with well, there's a corresponding bloom in programs like yours where people are fascinated with learning more about the inner world and learning more about themselves and these kinds of psychological issues. So that is going on at the same time. Thank goodness, because people are so hungry for it. They want to go there, and they may not be getting it in their relationships. So to me, it's like a race between which part of our mind is ultimately going to um, win out. And I hope it will be the side that thinks that the inside of people is just as important as what they do on the outside.
Mm. I agree. I hope that's the case as well. Um, okay, so let's say someone is unaware of the topic and hearing the term emotionally immature parent for the first time, but also it strikes a chord with them, like as if they saw the title of the book and they kind of got curious about it. What are some signs or feelings to help someone recognize that they may be suffering from or in a relationship with an emotionally immature parent?
Yeah, I think the first sign would be what we were talking about earlier with the emotional loneliness.
Hmm.
Like if you feel like you're not being seen or taken into account, or you're not being listened to, those are classic signs of being with someone who is emotionally immature, because the emotionally immature person just can't get off the subject of themselves. The way I look at it is, yes, that's very egocentric, but it's also kind of like they're always sort of patting themselves back together, like a clay model or something. They always have to be making sure that they're okay, and kind of putting themselves in the right shape. And if you're not helping them do that, they get annoyed with you or they get impatient with you because this is such a constant preoccupation of theirs. I call them self-preoccupied for that reason. Yeah, part of it is what we think of as the ordinary, narcissistic like self-absorption. But I think most of it is they're never really in a state of balance because they don't have a strong sense of self on the inside, not really. And so they need you to mirror them, to, make them feel good about themselves, help them keep their emotions in check, kind of keep them on an even keel. So when you're in a relationship with someone and it's all about them most of the time, that's a dead giveaway. The other thing is that if you are made to feel bad about yourself, guilt, shame, self-doubt, even fear, if that's going on in the relationship, then that person, and this could be boss employee. I mean, it doesn't have to be a deep, intimate relationship. It can be just any kind of dealings you have with someone. But if you come away from interacting with them feeling a little unsure of yourself or feeling bad, and maybe you can't put your finger on it, but you feel a little threatened or you feel a little inadequate or not as good as, that's a dead giveaway that you've been with someone who's emotionally immature because they have used the interaction to pat themselves back together again at your expense. And you will feel that because you've been psychologically used for that. Another thing that people will feel is that they can never do enough. They can never be enough. The person, there's that joke about, yeah, but what have you done for me lately? Uh, it's that feeling of, I give and I give and I give and I give, and they're like looking for the next thing that I do wrong, or they're looking to have their feelings hurt, or they're noticing that I'm paying more attention to this other person and they're not the star of the show. These feelings suggest that there may be some emotional immaturity in that other person. Because when a person is adequately emotionally mature, and I call them adequately, sufficiently, because I don't think there's somebody sitting on a cloud somewhere that is the emotionally immature person. All relative. But the adequately emotionally mature person has some energy to give you. There is a back and forth. There's a reciprocal, mutual quality to the interaction where you feel like you're getting your tanks filled a little bit. And you feel interested in them and they're showing curiosity about you, and it creates synergy. We human beings are amazing. Uh, Animals do this too. Like, put two dogs together and like, do we have more energy? Oh, yes.
Mhm.
We certainly do. Put two emotionally mature people together. Do we get more energy? Oh, yes, you really do. Because it's almost like we're made to be each other's batteries, in that sense of sparking, the feeling of being more present and more alive. I mean, I'm convinced that's why we took over the world, because by hanging out together, by being with each other, we create all this excess energy. And most of it is creative. Like, let's do this, let's do that. And so it's an amazing uh, benefit to our species that just the interactions that we have with each other lead to more and more energetic, thoughtful, kinds of processes that often end up being more creative. So if you're with a person who is not that way and they're more emotionally immature, you may end up feeling drained, tired. You may feel like it was boring. There's a superficiality to the level of conversation or discourse with an emotionally immature person because they just don't go too deep. And that energy hit is in the deep stuff.
Hmm.
And I think when people are denied access, one way or another, to that deep stuff, they go for stuff that feels deep. In other words, that it has deep sensation associated with it, like violence, like sex. Um, it because they are missing that feeling of energy coming up inside them just by being alive and being in a relationship with other people.
Well, that was a lot. But it was such a fitting and descriptive explanation to the question. Now, in the book, you talk about four types of emotionally immature parents. Can you tell us what those four types are?
Yeah, these four types came to me as uh, categories that described the parents of people I was working with in psychotherapy. And it's interesting. I really haven't revised them since I first came up with them. So they seem to be different enough to capture these different qualities. And I haven't really had to add any more to that. But the first one would be the emotional parent. And the emotional parent is probably what most people think of as an emotionally immature parent. They're very emotional. They're emotionally labile. They have big reactions, fast reactions. They pop off. They fall apart. They just aren't emotionally regulated in a way that could keep them kind of more steady. And unfortunately, with a parent like that, the child is often recruited to be the one that calms them down or, is hyper vigilant to make sure that nobody upsets, that parent. That expression of walking on eggshells is a good example of that because the person is trying to keep that overly emotional parent from getting upset. Um, then there is the kind of the opposite parent, which I call the rejecting parent. And this is a parent that really you wonder, like, why did they even get married? Or why did they even have children? Because they seem to have no interest in interaction with their children or anybody other than their buddies or who they like to be with or their friends. They just don't have any time or patience for anything that doesn't immediately kind of meet their needs. So this might be a parent who comes home and wants to be left alone, um, and gets annoyed or impatient with the children when they try to interact. It just isn't any interactional joy with them. And unfortunately, it makes the child feel like they've done something wrong all the time. Like they can't figure it out, but just being is somehow wrong because the parent seems like they are annoyed with them for just being there, basically.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. I had a client once that said that trying to relate to her father was like throwing herself against a locked door. So
Oh man.
that gives you
Wow.
the feel for it. And then another type of parent, this is the parent I call the driven parent. This is the parent that actually looks like the perfect parent because they seem to have everything all together. They make sure that their kids are involved in things, doing activities. Maybe they, are the head of the PTA or whatever, but they're very driven. They like to accomplish things. They like to get things done. Many of them have, businesses or advanced degrees. I mean, they're just doers. The problem is they can't slow down long enough. They're almost, I don't want to say addicted because that's so overused, but they're awfully fond of activity. And they much prefer that to getting into emotional subjects. So the typical thing would be a child who's having an emotional problem. Maybe someone is bullying them at school, or maybe they feel their feelings were hurt in an interaction. They wouldn't get too many words out before the parent would be problem solving it for them. The driven parent doesn't have the capacity to sit there and just contain that child's distress in a way that makes the child feel like, oh, somebody's with me, somebody understands me, somebody gets it. The driven parent can't do that. They will be saying, well, what did you say? And then what did he say? And then what did Mrs. So-and-so say? And why don't you, next time, they come in with all these fixes and completely miss the point, which is the depth of connection that child needs in that moment. So that's the driven parent. And then finally, there's the passive parent. And this parent is also hard to recognize as emotionally immature because they're often the favorite parent. They are often, they kind of go along with life. Now they, may have their own work, and I don't mean they're passive to the point of inactivity, but what I mean is that they just kind of go along with life, and they make the children feel like they have time for them more. Maybe they do things with the kids. They can be more playful than the other types. They can even show more empathy than the other types. But when it comes to protecting the child or stepping in, to take care of that child, or protecting the child against the other more emotionally immature parent, they don't do that. They're kind of like big kids themselves. They don't see themselves in this responsible adult role, and like they're the 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 last protection for this kid. They don't see it that way. They sort of see it like the kid and I are in this together with this other person who's very angry at us.
Mm.
But they wouldn't step in to do something about that. So that parent, while, they can be very important emotionally because they do have slightly more ability to, be there with the child, they don't go very deep either. So if the child is looking for true understanding, or as they get older, really more substantive, kind of emotionally intimate conversations with that parent, the parent gets uncomfortable and doesn't want to do that either. Yeah.
It almost sounds like a buddy
Yeah.
who's there on a surface level, but as soon as, like, for instance, like if you had a friend who was over and your parents got into an argument, the friend would leave at that point.
Right.
It almost sounds like this parent is the type of buddy who's there just to have fun, but if it gets too hot, they kind of sneak out of the back door.
Exactly. Exactly. And yeah, and I've had that is virtually how people have described that passive parent in their family. And it's been interesting too, because they are so loyal to the parent,
Mm.
because that parent is a buddy. Okay. That parent really did give them more emotionally than the other parent. So they kind of keep hope that they can ultimately forge more of a close and intimate relationship with that parent, and really communicate with them. They feel like that's more of a possibility, but actually, no. Just as you said, that parent is looking to slip out when it gets hot.
Mm. A question I wanted to ask is about siblings of emotionally immature parents. Can siblings respond to and take on different roles in an emotionally immature family system?
Yes, and that to me is like the most fascinating question. How does that happen?
Mm.
How is there one kid or two kids in a family who appear so much more responsible, um, uh, aware of things, willing to help, a whole list of characteristics, but basically we're talking about a kid who's more responsible and more mature. How does that happen? Especially when you get other kids, their siblings, same gene pool, um, and those kids are very enmeshed with the parents, or really having trouble becoming their own people, individuating into their own true adulthood. I have a friend by the name of Tiffany Root, who's she's a therapist out on the West Coast, and she thinks that that person, that kid in the family that becomes the emotionally mature one, the responsible one, that kid early on takes on the role of the parent's caretaker. And they feel this role responsibility. And I think that it's very possible that the parent turns to them in that, and kind of sees that ability in them, or that intelligence in them, or that sensitivity. I don't know what the parent sees, but they kind of know that this is the kid that's going to take care of them.
Mm.
This is the kid who'll think, about what needs to be done, or who will step in if something's going on. Lots of times these kids become like the rescuers or the heroes of the family. But I wonder if there's something about the parent recognizing that they need one of these children to grow up and become an individual who can take care of them. And that there may be some validation of that kid's potential, psychologically speaking, that the parent supplies out of their own need to have somebody to rely on. Now, unfortunately, what happens is that then you end up with a person who is mature beyond their years, precocious emotionally, takes care of other people all the time, is the wise one. They often say, "Oh, that kid's an old soul." Every
Mm.
time I hear that, I'm thinking, "Oh no, nothing there about the soul. It's that they have had to grow up too fast." Okay, and they got on it very early to figure out how things work to keep themselves and their families safe. That's what that's about.
Mm.
And so that person grows up with these excellent skills, a lot of emotional maturity, and yet there's like this squishy center where when they get overwhelmed, they really get overwhelmed, because there's a little kid that sits in there that hasn't been brought up, fully into a relationship with their parent where they could maximize their inner development, their tolerance for stress, those kinds of abilities and strengths. So it's often interesting to me that people who are so high functioning and so emotionally mature, I mean, they have good relationships, they're really caring people, that they can get into these situations where they feel like overwhelmed, overcome, maxed out, because nobody expects it. And so people don't take it seriously. They'll say, "You never failed at anything in your life," or "You'll be
Mhm.
fine. You always land on your feet."
Mhm.
It's like, yes, that's true at great expense.
Right. And that's so emotionally invalidating as well.
Exactly. Exactly.
Mm.
So that's one of the things that we wanna be looking at and dealing with in therapy, if you're a therapist, is to be that person, create that space where that person can come in and let that squishy center, be contained and help to grow into, its full form instead of feeling so overwhelmed at times. And that is what
Yeah.
happens in therapy. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think even though the person may have the semblance of emotional maturity, it could have been something that they had to do. But like you mentioned, there's that squishy center there. And when that is exposed, that I feel is when that person is taken back to maybe where their emotional development had to change in order for them to be who the family or the parent needed them to be.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
Mm. Can you explain the difference between emotional enmeshment and emotional maturity?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Emotional maturity is when you have enough of a sense of self that you feel a kind of an inner confidence or an inner knowing about who you are, what you're like. Um, Lots of times there's an ability to deal with stress in very creative and um, I guess I would say successful ways. You know, Emotionally immature people use kind of high level coping mechanisms like they use humor or they just
Mm.
are able to push things out of their mind for a moment. It's called suppression. They can make things line up. I'm going to deal with this now and I'm not going to deal with that. And they have this structure inside themselves, psychologically speaking, that allows them to um, tolerate stress, have some patience, have some ability to delay gratification. Uh, they kind of know how the world works. Their reality testing is good. They can be objective. They can have a long range perspective on things. So these are all, attributes of a grown up. Okay, in the best sense of the word. They became their own person. They grew up and they individualize from their family in the ways that acorn that we were talking about in the
Mm.
beginning, in the ways that acorn demanded that they grow. And they actualize that. So that would be the emotional maturity. It brings along its own individuation. You, like I say, become your own person. But for the person who is caught up in the family dynamics with the parents usually to the point where they are not allowed to grow up. That's what family therapists call enmeshment. The parent sees that child as a child who's going to remain the child. I mean, it's like they never really leave home. Or if they leave home, mentally, they're still like their parent's child. They think about what the parent would think of that. They think about um, uh, like they use the parent as a model of what they should like or not like. They just never really grow into their own individuality. And the parent rewards this with some of these children by being very comfortable with them, being very close with them, having a lot of contact with them. Now, to another child in the family, it may look like that enmeshed kid is the favorite because the parent just seems to kind of fixate on them more than the other kids, lets them do more, kind of gives into them more, builds them up. But if they're not looking inside the kid to see what is this child's real individual potential, who are they really, aside from me? Who are they? If they're not doing that, instead they're saying, "Oh yeah, well you're the you're the fun one, or um, the one who always does the art," or they come up with these little roles for them and pigeonhole them, and then never let the kid grow out of that because the parent will kind of discourage that sort of growth that would take the child away from the family ultimately. So when you're enmeshed, um, your job is to try to find your own individuality again through tuning into your feelings and your thoughts, and not always reverting back to what it is that the parent thinks is important.
Okay, so question on individuality for children of emotionally immature parents. Do emotionally immature parents see individuality as a threat?
Yes, they do, because it makes them feel very lonely.
Hmm.
And also because they don't have a strong sense of self themselves. It feels better to them to have a child who kind of, anxiously or insecurely looks to them for guidance, because that buffs them up, that
Hmm.
they feel like a strong adult. They feel like, oh, I'm the dad of the family, or I'm the mom of the family. I'm the grandma, whoever. They feel better when people are weaker around them. But the child who develops that individual sense of self, who really grows into this thinking, feeling, unique individual, yes, that person is a threat because they're doing something that the parent couldn't do, which is find themselves and find their own individuality. And they're separate from the parent. They're refusing to be in this enmeshment with the parent. And that makes that parent feel very insecure and very alone because they don't know how to relate to that kid if it's not enmeshment.
Wow.
Like they can use the kid, like, will you please do something with your little brother? You know, they
Hmm.
can they can turn to the kid to use them and use their skills, but they have trouble um when it comes to how do we have a relationship with that unique kid as we get older. And the emotionally immature parent can't do that. They don't have those skills and they don't know how that works. So they end up just trying to pull that kid back down into the family mass, so to speak, so that they don't escape and leave them feeling more lonely. If you grow up with enough emotional maturity, that's not a problem because, okay, you became an individual. Now I'm going to relate to you like a fellow adult. Okay. And we'll continue to have a relationship as you grow up and have your family and whatever, because I'm going to treat you like you're a real person if I'm the parent.
Wow.
Yeah. And so there is this mechanism that people have to continue that parent-child relationship as the child gets older, but it has to be done through emotionally mature mechanisms of empathy and respect, communication, truth, you know? And when they can't do that, because those are very high order skills, yeah, they feel uncomfortable with that kid. They just don't have something essential in common with them.
Wow. And then that could make that child feel so emotionally lonely.
Yes, yes, yeah, and
And then
also, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, if that skill set is never learned, that could become generational.
Absolutely. Yes, it does. And, it's interesting that um, in some schools they have programs for helping kids like learn about emotions, learn about self-management, self-awareness, that kind of thing.
Mm.
And that's one of the greatest programs that could help take a child out of that kind of generational loop, because they learn about some of these things that they wouldn't see in their families.
Okay, so building off of the parents not having the skill set to deliver a sense of emotional security to the children, what do emotionally immature parents often do in the absence of being able to provide emotionally when it comes to focusing on the physical?
Emotionally mature parents can do great with the physical.
Hmm.
They really can. And this is something that's often very confusing to their children, because I've had many people in therapy say, well, I'm, you know, that, they're having trouble with their parent and, it's so painful for them and so on. And then they'll say, but they were so good to me when I was sick. I remember that, they brought me ice cream, or I remember that time that, I came downstairs and I had a nightmare and they gave me a Coca-Cola, and, they remember, they remember these times when the parent was able, to kind of be there for them. And that makes it very, confusing to them to think about, well, doesn't that mean that they loved me? And I would say, well, yes, I really do think they loved you. I mean, yes, I think they do love you. If you felt loved and you felt bonded to them, that happened. That's real. It's the quality and the depth that may be the problem. So you may have the parent that takes really good care of you when you're sick. They spend the the last bit of the family budget so you can get that new shirt for the first day of school. They think about the material stuff, and they can give at that level, but they don't really know what to do at an emotional level. So it's kind of um it's kind of confusing to the kid when their child can be, I mean, when their parent that was a slip. When their when their parent can be so generous and so sensitive to physical needs, or, taking care of them when they're sick, or that kind of thing. Giving them money when they need it, that kind of material, concrete support, but yet can't offer the emotional support because they just don't have the inner resources to do that, and it's frightening to them. That getting close business tends to make them feel off balanced and kind of anxious, and they don't know where all this is going, and they pull out. Um, but yeah, that is often a very confusing thing. But it can be there. You can have great material care and support, and you can still be emotionally lonely.
Hmm. You mentioned something in the book called a healing fantasy.
Mm.
And I think that emotionally immature family systems or parents can often create these in children who have an emotional injury. or who are emotional lonely because they're looking for that secure attachment but unable to find it. So I wanted to ask you if you could talk a little bit about a healing fantasy and what it is.
Yeah, the healing fantasy is when a person believes that they're going to be able to one day reach the parent, get the parent to see how important a closer relationship would be. They will get the parent to listen. The parent will say, "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry that I wasn't there for you. Now I see that I should have, been this kind of parent, or I should have listened to you." And with a couple of them that I've worked with, it's been like a deathbed fantasy. Um, and interestingly, at times people have had moments with their parent that were sort of like, oh, and this is I mean, this is a kind of a trope in movies and things, where, at the last minute, the person's dying and they kind of reveal that they really cared about that child. I mean, it's heartbreaking. But that's the kind of healing fantasy that a lot of people have about their parents. The problem is not that they can never do that they never show any regret or they never show any desire for more of a relationship. It's that they can't sustain it. I mean, they might show a moment, but if you perk up in response to that moment and want to communicate further and get into it in more depth, they're going to be backing up as fast as you're coming forward. Okay. So, unfortunately, we can get the idea that the parent has more ability and potential than they really do, um, because it's not sustainable for them. Maybe they show little glimpses of it here and there, and that fuels that healing fantasy. Like one day they'll be like that all the time, and we'll be close and we'll be able to communicate and we'll work all this stuff out, that's been there all these years. Uh, but that would require that parent really did some inner work themselves.
Hmm. Well, thank you for explaining that. So we talked a lot about what emotional immaturity is, um, how it can be in a family system, how parents can be emotionally immature, how it can be passed down through generations. Um, so if someone starts to have a knowledge of what it is and they want to make strides to heal from emotionally immature relationships, how can they start to identify emotionally mature people?
Mm. Yes, and we hope that that's exactly what they do. But emotionally mature people, they make you feel like you can be yourself. They make you feel comfortable. They make you feel interesting. If you're with an emotionally mature person, you'll find yourself opening up to them and, even sort of saying, I can't believe I'm telling you all this, because that emotionally mature person is capable of taking in what you're saying and empathizing with it in a way that encourages you to let yourself be known because they're interested. Okay. They can imagine what you're talking about when, you're telling them about something significant in your life. They are interested in that. They also have been dealing with stuff inside themselves. So they're able to be there for you in just even in a little conversation. There's just a sense of presence, a sense of a real self inside that person. It isn't all social chit chat or one upping your story or those kinds of
Mm,
more competitive, performative interactions. It's a real connection between two people at this self level. So when you are with them, you have that feeling that it's possible to be yourself, which is energizing. Your energy goes up when you're around them in a good way, in a warm way, not in a grandiose way, but you just feel better about stuff. There's often quite a bit of humor. There's a sense that you don't have to be perfect with this person, that you can kind of, explain it to a degree and they get it because they want to get it. They're interested. You don't have to spell every little thing out because they have empathy and they have imagination. So with the emotionally mature person, you get the feeling that they are secure in themselves and they can be interested in receiving what you have to tell them about yourself. It's a lovely feeling. But the way that it comes off is that you feel comfortable. You don't feel judged. You don't feel unsafe. You feel comfortable and you feel like you can be yourself around them.
Well, that sounds nice.
Yeah.
I hope that anyone who listens to this can hear your words and recognize the qualities that you describe so that they know that they are around someone who can provide space for them emotionally and that they can be safe in that relationship.
Yeah, I love the way you say that they provide space for them, because that is really the emotionally mature way of relating. Um, we create space inside ourselves for the other person to come into, and then they're well taken care of within that space, and you can feel it. Yeah, it's lovely.
Okay, I want to ask a personal question. If there was one thing in particular that you want to be known for that would define your legacy, what would that be?
I think it would be that what goes on in the inside world is just as important as what goes on in the outside world. If I contributed to people realizing that, that would be the greatest legacy I think I could have. Um, that I would have been a champion for the true self, for the inner world, and what that means to our development as individuals and our development as a species, that we could use our inner experience and experiences to keep growing and creating and making things better. I mean, to me, as we stayed in touch with ourselves and made more and more connections and that inner world was valued, there's going to be more meaning in the world. Because when the inside world of a person is as important as what they do or the outside world, that person has become meaningful to you. And if we felt that way about each other, I mean, the world wouldn't have a choice but to reflect that, in better relationships and, happier kids and more meaningful work. Yeah, it's when we get in this thing where we start we start measuring ourselves against standards of success or even notoriety, that we lose touch with how important that inner world is. So, yeah, that would be my preferred legacy.
I'm pretty sure you've already got that. Um, so thank you for what you've done to provide that legacy, because it's here already.
Thank you. Well, thank you.
Last question. If you could use your platform to educate anyone who may be struggling with their mental or emotional health and might be uncertain on how or where to start, what would you say?
Oh, I mean, about 6 things just flew through my mind. But let me boil it down to go after those people and those experiences that give you energy, that give you an uplift. Okay? It could be through books, it could be through movies, it could be through art, it could be through activities, but whatever it is, pay attention to what gives you that increase in energy, because that will guide you to more of what you need to feel better in life, basically. And we are equipped for that because each one of us has a radar for those things that fit our energy and fit our interests. And I think like we all have our thing, or, we all have our interests. When we don't follow them, when we don't live them, we end up suppressing our vitality. We suppress our spontaneity. We suppress our creativity, and your energy goes down. So, rather than saying do this or do that, of course, I would push books, because that's what I love to do, but that's not everybody's thing. But whatever it is that you pursue, if you make sure that it's the thing that makes you feel that lift or feel that little increase in energy, yeah, then you know that you're on the right track for yourself.
Wow, that was beautiful. Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for this. Um, I've looked forward to the opportunity to have this interview with you for so long, and you didn't let me down. So I'm very grateful that you agreed to do this with me. I'm grateful for your work, for your book. It, like I said, it's life changing, and I'm just grateful for who you are.
Oh, thank you so much, Jalon, and thank you for the good work that you're doing. Like I say, this is the way that the good stuff happens. It's when involved people get the word out, and create, like you said, these spaces that people can come to for that uplift and for that confirmation that there is something inside them that is growing and is, like bigger than the workaday life, that it's their meaning and their purpose. And we can tell when we get near it. So, when you provide forums like you do on your podcast, it gives people a touchstone, a place where they can come and be inspired by those kinds of thoughts. So, yeah, it's been absolutely wonderful talking with you today. I wasn't let down either. I'm so relieved that you weren't. We knew it was going to be good.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it so much. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, I have a website at Lindsay. Wait a minute, Lindsay C. Gibson, PSYD. That's my website. But if you want more current material, I can be found on social media under Academy of Self-Help. There's also material on YouTube. If people just Google me, they're going to find an abundance of stuff that is out there. But the more current things are probably going to be under the Academy of Self-Help on Instagram and TikTok, that kind of place.
Okay, and then what about your books?
Books are available wherever books are sold. Um, and I have a new interesting kind of venture here. We're doing a guided journal that is coming out the 1st of March, actually. And that was my attempt to create a kind of experience for people where I'm talking to them, asking them questions, and then they have spaces in the journal that they can write their answers. And it's a way of getting to know yourself better, getting to know your history better, and then what you want to do with your life. So that's coming up the 1st of March.
Sounds awesome. All right. Again, well, thank you so much for this. Thank you for doing the work to be able to provide answers for people who don't have a language or a voice for what they feel emotionally. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for what you do. And thank you for how you do it.
Oh, thank you so much, Shalon. Thank you for having me.